Okay, hello everybody. We have the pleasure to have with us Anne Hampton, the artist who has inspired and implemented the Autoteatro performance of the 5th International Festival of the NTNG. First title, Undone So Many. Current title, Borderline Visible, Lausanne to Izmir. And together with us is also David Bergé, the editor of Time Based Editions, because this whole project will be produced as a book. And David will be questioned by Maria Ριστάνη from the English Literature Department of the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. Thank you so much for being here, Maria. The floor is to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Amalia, very much. And also a special thanks to the State Theatre of Northern Greece for providing the frame for all these discussions. So I'm very pleased and honored to be conversing with Anne and David today. Is it David or is it David? David, okay, so sorry, I'm sort of changing David today. On this wonderfully dense acoustic experience that we've had the pleasure to enjoy during the festival. And we are still having, for those of you who haven't experienced the piece, I think it's on till Thursday. Amalia, correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, so I'm very pleased to be having that discussion on this wonderful piece, which, if I understand correctly, is also itself traveling in a sense to a final destination, that destination being the book project, perhaps, that you're working together on. So within that traveling process, I would like us to start with this new title that captured my attention. And what is it that is borderline visible or invisible that inspired this title?
It was a very tricky process trying to come to a title for this one, and there were multiple changes of mind as things went along. I mean, even just in the writing, there's obviously many themes that are intertwined in the journey, even just in the kind of present day, what's addressed in terms of contemporary detail. But and then when you start bringing in all the historical stuff as well, and my own personal histories that are kind of braided into it, things start to get quite challenging when you try and kind of pin it down with a single title. It was a really tricky to do. But in the end, I came to this title, Borderline Visible, because I think that for me, in a way, that the most interesting or challenging aspect of it all was to look into the processes by which things are rendered either visible or invisible to us, or the way that we might render those things as forgotten or memorable to ourselves as well. So there's like political and personal processes, but they're always calculated. It's never, it doesn't happen by chance. If something is denied for 100 years by a country and contested by many other countries, then, you know, the reason why the majority of a population in that country may, you know, continue to deny it is calculated. It's not by chance. And or if a human subject is considered worthless or less than a person, like a non-person, the processes by which people do not count are calculated. So they, you know, again, people don't just sort of slip out of out of being valued or something. Those processes are calculated. So this idea of borderline visible, almost not visible, it's trying to kind of grasp hold of things before they do slip into oblivion and retrace some of those routes by which things get forgotten. So that might be, for example, the stones, the flagstones in the Thessaloniki Cathedral that were, or indeed in your university, that were made from the Jewish cemeteries, the gravestones there. Again, sort of borderline visible, the pieces of those stones in the back of the cathedral strewn among the grass. But then also, there's the threads in the piece, there's a lot to do with also mental instability. So there's a sort of, in English anyway, kind of a very slight allusion to that with the use of the word borderline, but it's mostly to do with Alzheimer's actually in the piece and the sort of slow whirlpool sucking one into oblivion, which is always a difficult process to look at. In fact, the time it takes is also invisible. It's like looking at the hands of a clock. You don't really notice it. But of course, anyone who's had that experience of dealing with Alzheimer's is, yeah. So anyway, those are the things that are sort of braided all together. There's probably more that I'm not thinking of straight away, but it was a title that seemed to span as much as possible there, and of course also borderline in the sense of that the trajectory of the journey that I took was also crossing multiple borders, some of them more marked than others, with regard to how easy it is to cross, depending on where you're coming from and who you are.
A border that I felt was definitely crossed is that border between the political, the personal and the public, the personal and the political that you've mentioned, and because it begins as a personal memoir for you, but it grows into a political narrative with much more than personal resonances for us, for example, Greeks listening to it. I was wondering if the same piece, if you're planning to have the same piece traveling to Turkey, for example.
Yes, we'll do a Turkish version. Sorry.
No, this is what I was about to say. It would be interesting to see the resonances in the neighboring country.
Yeah, we're definitely going to show it in Turkey. One of the co-producers has a base in Istanbul, and yeah, that's definitely on the cards to show it both in Istanbul and Izmir, and hopefully elsewhere as well. I mean, that would be very meaningful, and I think we'll probably cite it in possibly in one of the synagogues in Izmir. That's what we're hoping for.
Okay, that would be really, really interesting. That would be really interesting to see what reactions.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's another reason why. I mean, of course, like it's interesting for many different reasons, and fortunately, we're talking to different organizations that are trying to make this connection between Thessaloniki and Izmir.
Okay.
Which are, obviously so connected through the Sephardi histories. And there was various attempts to set up projects that connected, and it can be that this is the one. But of course, it's valuable from the different perspectives of this history that remain so, I don't want to say polarized, but there's many different views that I'm still learning and trying to understand, and I come to it not in any way neutral, because as a British person, it has been pointed out to me that it's not the easiest thing to talk about because of the British involvement in the Greek invasion. That's the backlash to which was Smyrna. And the fire and the the subsequent catastrophe, as it's known in Greece, and population exchange. All these things are things that I learned during the project. And of course, yeah, in Turkey, the views are very different, so it will be interesting to see that. But I think most of all, like another thing that's difficult to see that I would describe as borderline visible are also the different experiences of loss described in the piece. So when you're mourning someone, when someone has left in whatever way that is, maybe it's death, maybe it's some other kind of absence. It's not an immediate cutoff. I think, like the Western way of thinking about death is that 1 minute you're alive, next minute you're dead, and that's it. But the actual emotional experience of it is much more gradual, and the passage from someone being a company in life to some other kind of company is a gradual one. It takes time, and I'm interested in how we can think of that process also publicly, and there's different experiences of public loss, of course, on both sides here in terms of Greece and Turkey, but somehow both sides are witness to and implicated in what's going on in terms of the mass loss of life that's happening with people trying to get into Europe, which is, yeah, pretty much where the book finishes off, where the piece, the performance, whatever it is that we're calling a time-based edition now.
Okay. How do you feel this links with your previous Autoteatro works? Because I'm not sure if would you label this as Autoteatro in a...
Actually, no. And I was going to maybe point that out. It's great to show this piece after having already been in Thessaloniki last year with Scale, which explicitly is an Autoteatro piece. The way I think of that in terms of a protocol is that Autoteatro is usually for more than one person and has this kind of relational aspect. So if you're following instructions and you do something, it's not just for your own benefit. It's in order to elicit a performance for the person sitting next to you or opposite you, or the other people involved in the performance, all of whom are participants. So that's the other rule, in a way, that is there's never anyone just looking. In that sense, it might look like Autoteatro now, and in a way it is, because when it's happening as a group session, as it's happening in Thessaloniki, when you've got like 25 people all turning pages together, of course you are contributing to something that's more than just you. So perhaps there we can think of it in terms of Autoteatro, but fundamentally as a format, it's also something that can be experienced alone, and where it sort of slightly slips out of that. But so much of the moves, in a way, that are contained within the dramaturgy of those 77 minutes do kind of build on or come from things that I've learned in other pieces, especially the work that I made with Tim Etchells, including the Quiet volume, which was also shown last year in Thessaloniki, the piece that happens in libraries. So both the Quiet volume and Not to Scale involved an engagement with paper, things that were on the page. And Tim and I also made another piece in between called Lest We See Where We Are, which was with archive photography. So again, printed matter and mixed with audio. So a lot of that kind of ended up in this piece somehow, in terms of the, some of the engineering, let's say, under the surface, the little tricks of how to keep the flow going, an understanding that to put one's finger on a page, even if it feels absurd sometimes, is a gesture that's worth doing.
yes, that sense of materiality of the book as a material object, that haptic sense, we've had it in the previous pieces last year, and we have it again together this year. So speaking of books, David, and since you are involved together with Ant in this final destination of time-based editions, would you like to talk to us more about that idea? What does this mean, that idea of a time-based edition, and how does this fit with the Borderline Visible project?
So both Ant and I have an artistic practice that involves time.
Okay.
And I recently, in the first lockdown, started to work with writing and publishing. I started a series of books called Kiklada Press.
Yes.
And then when Ant and Rita were doing the trip last year, I met them in Athens, and we started talking more in depth. We knew each other for a while, and then I think a couple of months later, Ant sent me a video which was a succession of the images and a voiceover. And I brought up the idea I challenged him, saying that this could actually be a book. Or what if a physical thing that is a book comes into this interface?
Mm.
And he thought that was a bit of a strange idea, because if you look at the history of books is so large and is so vast. But then we started thinking of books as something that can actually be quite live as well. And then since I had the series Kiklada Press that works very well as a series, even with, because if you discover one book, you may easily through the series discover another book. We endeavored this imprint called Time Based Editions. So it's a series of books that we could also call pieces. They can be performed. They're books actually that get activated because they have on their first page a QR code, which nowadays everyone has a smartphone and probably also some headphones. So this QR code can be scanned and will activate the beginning of a soundscape, which guides you as an audience in a time-based way through the books. So we actually make books at time-based editions that take now, in the case of the first book of Ant, 77 minutes. And the idea of the series to have 1 or 2 releases every year. Each book is made by one artist. Maybe the second one takes 25 minutes or an hour. So with time-based editions, we try to bring the idea of time with the object physicality of the book and the handling of the pages.
In some ways, it's like an oxymoron to say based edition, because we're used to being free with a book. We spend, maybe 3 months reading a book or a week. It can vary. Whereas here, it's like, it's set. It's a time-based medium.
Engagement. It's an engagement in time with a book.
Yeah. And in a way, for me, I think the point where I thought, yeah, this is really making sense to me now, it was when I thought of it as an audiovisual format, like film, but where the audio and the visual separated, it's 2 separate entities, and it's the participant / reader / viewer / listener who is holding those 2 elements together, who's holding the A and the V of AV together with their participation, with their continued agreements to go along with it. And there's a sort of, I think there's a very subtle ethics of participation there, which differs from just sitting down and watching a film where the 2 are kind of bonded together and handed to you on a plate. There's something about the inclusion of your body and the sort of how it slips into the here and now a little easier. You're not entirely, I think you are fairly immersed by the experience. It does become immersive in a way. It's very easy to pull out of that. So for example, when we turn the page,
do the page turning yourself.
And occasionally I ask you to close your eyes. And I don't think I've ever seen a film where there's a voiceover that says, okay, now please just close your eyes, or put an item of clothing over the TV so you can't see the screen anymore, or something. So it's easy to do that with a book. You can do, or you're asked to put your hand over, turn the page with your eyes closed and keep your hand on the page so you can't see it. These simple gestures that can be requested without too much faff. They seem to produce a lot, I think. And it also, you can do things like turning the book upside down. The designer who we're working with, Roland Brauchli, a brilliant Swiss designer, he mentioned something that stuck, that he said, with a film, you can pretend to go backwards, but with a book, you can really go backwards. So this idea of creating a non-linear path through the book was very attractive. And it also means that the dramaturgy, the flow through the printed matter, is a kind of invisible thread, again, kind of borderline visible. Once you've finished, you can't remember what the order was, but the book stays there as a trace of the experience that you've had, which I think is quite a strong one. And so if you've bought the book, you have this thing that remains afterwards, and I think the experience of going through it afterwards is going to be a very peculiar one, quite a kind of complex, layered set of memories and emotions, which also beg more inquiry. There are pages in there that we don't touch on in the audio-led time-based version, but that you will discover afterwards, some texts, some essays. And so in a way, it's a time-based edition, but it's also not. It's also a book like any other book afterwards. So there's two ontologies there coexisting, but equally two other kinds of realities as well, which is that in the way that they're distributed and the way they get around, because they will be bought and sold as books normally are in bookshops. And so, we as live practitioners are pretty excited about accessing this new kind of world of distribution for what is essentially a live work, or at least a trigger for a live performance. But then they're also presented as they are at the moment in Thessaloniki as productions for group settings with a programmed lighting setup that produce blackouts when you're asked to close your eyes and things like that. So the two things can exist in these two worlds, which have their own vocabularies, their own audiences, their own cultures and
distribution networks. But the fact that it's work that can be both experienced for the intimacy of one person buying the book, taking it home and doing it alone, or another group of people going to the theater or performance space and doing it with 25 is what we're aiming to do with this series.
Yeah, and then the other thing that I think is exciting on that level is also that when you scan the QR code, it doesn't just immediately start the audio. First, you choose the language. So there's already, when we launch it in September, there will be the Greek version, which, I mean, really, it's such a great version. And I want to shout out to Katerina, who's here in the Zoom, for the amazing work that she's done on this. I mean, really extraordinary. Across the board also, the whole team, Prodromos, who's also here, and Giorgos Kolovos, whose voice is so fantastic. This will be always available wherever the book is, the Greek version. And similarly, the French version that will launch together with the premiere when we do it in Lausanne in September. And then next year coming, we will have German, Turkish, and Dutch. So they will build up, and so this single book will be accessible to people all over, hopefully.
I was thinking, you spoke of oxymoron before, and I was thinking that this is some kind of theatrical oxymoron in a sense that it's as if you can take your theatrical experience home with you and replay it and relive some kind of expanded liveness that we are not accustomed to thinking of in terms of theater. We speak of in present continuous tense as things happening in the here and now.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of projects, you know, this sort of grows into another time and another space. You can take it home with you. You can re-listen, you can re-experience, rediscover.
Yeah, you can gift it and you can host it. Like you can set it up for people, and I think that's something that probably will happen. I mean, the way I think of it in terms of, like, I feel like what you're edging towards there it's interesting to me, because for me, it's quite normal now to have a sort of rather expanded view on what the possibilities are of doing live work. And generally, I mean, for years now, what I've liked to do is to think not so much what kind of theatre is this, or how does this fit into our understanding of theatre, but just more of all the formats that exist out there, like whether they are audio visual or poetry or painting or whatever, like when it involves, when there's liveness involved, no, put it another way, what can you do live that you cannot do in any other format? Like what requires an engagement in the here and now? Like what do we think of as liveness? What is that? Like if something is better served as a film, then for sure it's probably better to do it as a film. Whereas, you know, so here there is a difference between a time-based edition experience and a film, because, I mean, if nothing else, when you finish a film, okay, you have the film, you can watch it again if you want, but it doesn't exist in this different way as it does here with the book. So it sort of sits, even just the book sitting on your table afterwards has a kind of presence, I think. It's sort of, it will shimmer if the experience that you've had is strong, of course. It will kind of glow a little bit after the event. But yeah, it's really just like another iteration of that thought, in a way, of like what can you do live that you cannot do in any other format? What really requires liveness as a way of doing things? And it's of course hilarious. I mean, I've said this before in the past, I think, to myself or to others, but that in such a short time ago, in terms of humanity, liveness was pretty much the only format out there, apart from maybe written scrolls. That was the original recording format, like the record. But and now it's like considered a kind of minority art form, liveness. You know, it's like everything is screen based or recorded or, you know, reproducible media.
Mediated, yeah.
Yeah. And so here we're kind of straddling the two. We are using reproducible media in two different kinds, and yet combining them to pull it back into something that activates a here and now of the page.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Does this edition that you're thinking of, does it also involve space except for time? I mean, is it important? Because I've noticed that strange immersive experience when I listened to the piece, that I sort of traveled away from the space in which we were in, the folklore museum in Thessaloniki. I forgot about space altogether, and I sort of traveled away in your mental space, in this acoustic landscape that you've created. But at the same time, I was so fully aware of my body leafing the pages and touching the book. So it was this strange kind of immersion, both outside my body, but at the same time, outside space, but at the same time, so fully aware of my body in space. But I was thinking, how was the actual space, like the museum space or the theater space in the State Theatre of Northern Greece? Was it actually used, and are you thinking of using the space in which the experience is held in future performances? Are you thinking of implicating space more actively, perhaps? Because this is something that you do with the library space. It's meaningful.
Well, I mean, it's less explicit, site specific in this one. I would say it's a piece that's very easily porous to its surroundings. So, you know, citing it in a villa that used to belong to one of the most important Jewish families, as it is here, there in Thessaloniki, in the Folkloric Museum, that resonates. It resonates, I think, in the National Theatre, when at the end, instead of bringing the lights back up after the fade, the windows are open and you see the sea, into which bodies are being thrown every day by the Greek coast guards. So, you know, you've lived through that just now, and so again, I think that can resonate. But of course, this piece will hopefully tour widely in a number of different places. But it's amazing already how, you know, we're talking about showing it in the Netherlands, and sure enough, there's a large Sephardi history in the Netherlands as well. So it's not so difficult to find ways in which the surroundings will resonate with the work, I think. But it's very nice what you were saying before also about this take on immersion, because it's a word that's, I think, rather overused or gravitates to it quite easily these days with different kinds of things, including now, of course, VR and stuff, which is only going to become more of a thing. But rather than thinking of immersion as some kind of ultimate form of representation, I think what's exciting is to offer the possibility to be taken away and only to kind of then cut the strings of the decor and let everything crash down, so that you suddenly feel really what it is to be in the room again. And that coming and going is something that I've always valued very much, even if it's a little painful. It's one of those kind of necessary evils, perhaps, where you sort of start to sort of feel, again, it's something that you can only do live in a way. You know, to get it from TV is difficult. You can sort of do it sometimes. There's nice examples of it, but I think in terms of like the space that might offer you that kind of immersive feel, it happens in different ways in the book. Like, I mean, of course, in just the writing, like any good book, you can be taken away, especially kind of travel writing or things with that kind of a movement. There's images, of course, which in themselves are literal representations. But then there's also the sound, and that's kind of a more subtle level. Sometimes there's binaural sound as well, which is recorded with microphones where your ears are. Recreate the exact architecture of the head, so that if you're wearing headphones, you're listening to literally what my head was listening to in that situation. So when we're in that terrible cemetery at the end of The Nameless, and there's just the gentle sound of insects and birds around. And then when we cut to the center of Germany, and you also have insects and birds around, I was using the exact same microphones also on my head. So it's sort of conceptually quite interesting in a way. You're sort of transported poof, like that from one place to the next. Yeah. And I think in that moment, you know, we're making that connection between different ways of understanding what the center of a place might be, the center of Europe, represented in that graveyard. Yeah, so different kinds of ways of taking one away. And I guess, like I was saying before, it's never too difficult to come right back to the kind of bare fact of reading a book. And I guess that's one of the great pleasures of reading anyway, is that there's this sort of miracle of presence being conjured from the page as you're going over the pages. You know that you're doing that work yourself, and there's a sort of gratification in that, which is very, very unique to the reading experience.
And another wonderful experience was the experience of the break, the pause, when you ask us to actually pause reading and stand up and walk in the room. Because that pause is something that you don't usually get in a theatrical experience or in a reading experience. So that pause was so strong, together with the others as a collective experience in the room, landing us back to what was happening in space, and then plugging in the earphones again to transfer.
Yeah, it's great. I'm so grateful to NTNG for facilitating this prototype, because it's through making it that some of these things got discovered.
Okay.
Like that moment, I have a lot to thank to Caroline Parniot from Théâtre Vidi, Lausanne, where we will do the premiere. She, when she did it in a very early version, she was like, yeah, it would be nice to just have a moment to stand up and be able to stretch a little bit. and I was like, yeah, okay, why not? I mean, I had to give it a thought for a moment. But all these things that you wouldn't normally do, and you can sort of find ways.
As you said before, that the body is engaged in this work. Like often audience member, I feel like my body is completely ignored in the cinema, in dark theatrical performances where you're just like sitting on a chair. So it's also a way to activate the audience's body and to not ignore them.
Yeah, and very often there's a kind of there's a sort of parallel going on sometimes, or an illusion between a finger that you might see pointing or touching a word in a photograph in the book, and your own finger manipulating the book, or even perhaps being asked to touch a certain photograph or trace a line on a map. There's quite a few fingers in the book. Not that many full-bodied representations of people. Kept pretty much until the end. And so, but yeah, the most you see of people usually is their hands as we go. So it sort of pulls that in a bit, kind of parallel.
Okay. David, the question on books and book publishing. Do you see this project on time-based editions as perhaps a new direction for publishing options, as a way to animate books and theatricalize the reading experience?
Yes, definitely. I mean, it's quite a unique format, I think, to think in a physical object as a book that is not just information carrier, but that can also be activated by you turning the pages, and where not only instructions but also environmental sounds or even a soundtrack, music composition can come together with an experience of pages. So what we're now doing is really almost bringing two productions together. There's a whole sound production and edit, but at the same time also, together with Roland Brauchli, the designer, a whole book production, and they will come together as a series of books in the end of the day. So I think I'm quite excited by this new way of thinking, making books, but also how to bring them to people, again, as experiences or as group experiences.
It's funny that in a way to us it's surprising that that there are not that many examples out there so far. I mean, there's been a lot of artist books that have a CD kind of in the front cover. Most of the time you put the CD in and it's just like it's sort of extra material that's nice to have.
Extra.
It doesn't really kind of go together with it. I mean, the closest usually that you get to this is actually kind of stuff for kids. That maybe, I mean, I remember I had a small 45 record that went with Swiss Family Robinson, and there's a little bell to turn the page. And I just find those sort of formats so attractive. Like, you know, and it's so weird to me that they're not somehow taken on for adults. In any case, now what's nice is that with the normalization of QR codes, and finally, you know, the fact that for better or worse, most of us now have smartphones and headphones. What it means is that a book with a QR code can suddenly be this extra, you know, more than just a self-contained object that we know a book to be normally. So for publishing, it's a pretty interesting moment. And to our knowledge, we got there first. But it'll be really interesting to see what other people do with it if it happens, but we'll see where it goes. Yeah.
I've had the same question because now I'm exposed to children's books through my son growing up and us reading together. And I had the same question: what happens with adulthood? Why are we deprived of this?
I think it's the primacy of the self and this kind of this ability, which is quite a new one in terms of humanity, to internalize a voice, which is our reading voice. That's seen as like the natural vector of kind of as you get older, you get better at internalizing things. So there's another kind of aspect of the so-called ethics of participation here is that it can be done with other people as well. But just the fact of hearing a voice accompanying the reading experience, it brings books back into the space of being noisy objects, which is what they used to be. Before people could read silently, libraries were very noisy places because everybody was reading out loud. And rich men would have their own library, not so that they were not disturbed when reading, but so they would not disturb the rest of the family. And I like the idea that, you know, okay, we're talking about headphones a lot, but the work very often can come out of speakers as well. Even if you're doing it at home, it can be very nice. And so in a way, the book suddenly becomes this thing that isn't silent anymore.
And it's this give and take. You have that voice narrating to you, which is so wonderful and so intimate. I felt that sense of acoustic comfort. It probably takes us back to childhood memories of having our parents read to us.
I think from an adult's perspective, you either have audiobooks, which is more and more of a huge thing, but to have the book and audio together feels almost perverse in the sense that, you know, almost as perverse as reading with someone else. Like it's sort of, there's something that's either delicious or uncomfortable about it. And I think both can be useful for our purposes. Yeah, so I mean, you know, of course, the fact of doing it together with 25 people is different to doing it alone, but both have their values. Maybe we should open this up to questions now. I don't know if there are any.
Sure, we can.
There's someone in the chat, but maybe that was something else. Yeah.
I think that's Amalia saying that.
Yeah,
if there are
actually, yes, encouraging
questions.
People can put their digital hands up. Was that rain?
It's raining.
Oh, it suddenly started raining here in Athens. Hard. It's an event with the open window.
It will arrive in Thessaloniki as well. We've had this.
So we've explored things from lots of different angles. I'm trying to think what we haven't thought about, what we haven't spoken about yet.
Alzheimer's, talking about oblivion and this kind of use of memory, the kind we make memories and keep memories. It's this virtual traveling through our memories and the meddling in a way. I mean, the bringing into the story this old woman with Alzheimer's. This also helps us see memory in another from another point of view, with another role in the story. So this is also important, I feel.
Yeah, it's strange. I guess, I mean, I don't really have any kind of solid thing to say about it, but I guess what I will say, I mean, it's probably obvious, but in a way, I employ Alzheimer's as a theme in kind of different ways in the piece, like that it's there obviously as a personal experience that I've had, or I draw on it in terms of what happened with my half sister. But it's there also in a way as like setting up the kind of textural foreground or foundations for the piece, so that you feel an instability there from the start. I think everything to do with mental health is a little bit in the background in the piece all the way through. I mean, there's the stress and mental health conditions of the migrants attempting the border crossing, which is self-evident. There's T.S. Eliot's, which is a very strong thread throughout the piece, and the fact that he wrote that last section of The Wasteland while having while being treated for a nervous breakdown in Lausanne. And there's the piece from the Museum of Art Brut in Lausanne by Jean Tripier, with the kind of the writing that you can just make out, obese cemetery, written in this kind of strange old ancient Spanish dialect that I connect with the Ladino spoken by the Sephardi diaspora. There she, from a kind of mainstream perspective at the time, she was just simply considered mad. Her work was actually created in a trance, and she heard voices of dead people, and they poured out of her onto the page. And then the piece also starts off with a very solid description of a project involving memory, as in memorizing what people said to us on the journey through Germany.
Yes.
And that comes up against my half-sister's inability to memorize, or the attempt that she was making to memorize the Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, and that she got diagnosed with Alzheimer's just as she was trying to do that, and she gave up. She couldn't do it anymore, and she passed me the book, which is why I happened to have it on that journey. And so these things are kind of tied up. But then the fact that in that fairly critical moment on Samos, I was suddenly face to face with a poor lady who was deep in Alzheimer's and all alone and scared. Of course, that is also kind of written in a way that kind of tries to mirror, and I think there's a certain sort of muscular movement of themes in the piece that comes back. It's try to kind of spread things out through the book so that you feel those themes running all the way through it. And in a way, I guess it's the only real example of things being oblivion, of kind of true oblivion, where the process by which things are forgotten are not calculated for once, because everything else is. The fact that there's a graveyard of so-called nameless people and that not many people know about it, but that, you know, the visual evidence of that is just so incontestably appalling and direct testimony to what's happening, to what Europe is financing, all that kind of thing. You know, it's out of sight, out of mind. It's calculated, and so in a way, Alzheimer's. I guess I'm thinking about this now. Really, it's kind of there as a contrast to all these other processes that are calculated. Like there, it is just a process, a terrible one that we can only be witness to from the outside, where what was is no longer, where the essence of someone gradually fades away, and where the language finds itself at its limits.
So it's also a border, and it's connected also to the first title, Undone So Many.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
It was a nice title. I took it from a line in The Wasteland, and I like the word undone. It sort of suggests a kind of deterioration, a ruination. I am undone, or it's sort of fairly personal as well. But it also just means dead. I mean, it's a line that T.S. Eliot took from Dante. I mean, the poem is just full of samples. I mean, it's a great example of the kind of modernist gesture of taking and copy pasting and collaging other works. And in the original Dante, it's seeing these streams of people coming, crossing into hell, I guess, like and he said, "Oh, I didn't know that death had undone so many." And T.S. Eliot's looking at crowds of people crossing London Bridge in the fog, everybody looking at their feet. Yeah, it worked as a title for a while, but very difficult to translate in most languages. We were finding we were straight up against the impossibility of it in French, which we're trying to look at right now. Already in Greek, it was difficult. So I thought, no, let's go back to borderline visible that we had before. I think that will work. Okay,
borderline visible then. I think, thank you so much. It was really enlightening, connecting us to the real experience of the, let's say, performance, or the experience of this kind of piece. And yes, explaining and throwing light to bits and pieces of it. So thank you so very much. I don't know if anybody has any question or note or comment to add.
So thanks so much. It's been great talking, and really great also, Maria, to have had this dialogue also last year. I appreciate it a lot. Hope we can keep going.
Me too, and thank you very much. I keep that wonderful line you've mentioned on noisy reading, which ties in so well with your work on the quiet volume as well, despite the fact that it's called the quiet volume, because we had the chance to read together, I remember, passages from books, and how do we read together? So I keep that line and that reference to noisy reading.
Right. Very nice. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thanks a lot.